Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Novel. Today we're going to talk about Myles Connolly's novel, Dan England and the Noonday Devil. Now I confess, about 2 months ago I had not even heard of this novel. A friend of mine told me about it. I like it very much. You may remember that in this series of talks we did another Myles Connolly novel, Mr. Blue, which I also like. Some people think Dan England and the Noonday Devil is even a better novel. Now what about the title, Noonday Devil? Well, I've been trying to get into shape, and I've been swimming regularly. Maybe 4 times a week, I swim a half an hour nonstop. And at the end, I feel terrific. My body is tingling. As a matter of fact, often I could continue swimming if I wanted to push myself. But about 3 or 4 hours later, right around noon, I am exhausted. It just comes over me. I'm exhausted. So a friend of mine who knows more about physical condition than I do said, that's normal. That's natural. There's a kind of a rhythm to the body in terms of a day. So around noontime, the body, just, this is extreme to say this, shuts down. It doesn't shut down, but metabolism changes. And I suspect that's one of the reasons that siesta is so popular in so many countries, okay? Now that's a physical, the Noonday Devil there is like a physical, we're talking about something physical. Now we transfer it over to the spiritual life. There's a word that we don't hear often, Acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A. And what it means is lack of interest in things spiritual, a kind of laziness concerning things spiritual. And that's the usual meaning of the Noonday Devil. So you get the picture of a very enthusiastic Christian who starts out, at the start of the race and is full of zeal and so on, but around noon, okay, quote unquote, begins to run out of gas. I wonder if acedia is a big problem at this moment in the church, in the church in the United States. I wonder if I wonder if this is a problem among the millennials, that there's been a loss of interest. I remember Second Vatican Council, the enthusiasm, the excitement, okay? I don't find that in the church at this moment. Now, there's a couple of problems I have with Dan England and the Noonday Devil. The problems don't move me to discourage you from reading it. I want to encourage you from reading it, but I have a different understanding apparently than Myles Connolly about a couple of things. So I just told you what acedia is, but apparently for Myles Connolly, the Noonday Devil, I have to tell you the plot here. Dan England, much of his life feels he wants to do something important, something really heroic. And he to earn a living, he writes mystery novels, but he feels they're trivial. But he wants to write a great book. And he is a great talker, a kind of almost a magnet. He has a kind of a magnetic hold over an audience, and he always wants to get his ideas, which apparently people find very exciting and very brutal. He wants to get them into a book. Now, first question, okay, is having many friends an accomplishment? It is, and Dan England has many friends. Is not entertaining isn't the word I want. Inspiring people. Is inspiring people by speaking a great accomplishment? It is. So the first problem I have is I don't quite see that Dan England isn't doing something really significant with his life. But the way the book is written, you get the impression Myles Connolly is, first of all, Myles Connolly is telling us Dan England doesn't think he's doing something significant. But if I had a chance to meet Dan England, I'd say, hey, listen, I'd quote the end of It's a Wonderful Life. No man who has friends is a failure. Okay, the film It's a Wonderful Life, I'd quote that. So the second thing I would say is this. What is preventing Dan England from writing his book? I guess Myles Connolly would say many Noonday Devils. They're distracting him. He never gets around to sitting down and doing it. And I think we probably can all sympathize with that. We have ideas, we have plans. Sometimes we follow through on them and sometimes we don't, okay? But as the novel develops, Dan England does get an opportunity to do something heroic, okay? My view would be it's not so important. How can I put this now? It's not that he's not living a deep Christian life. He is. And that is heroic, doing that. So I'm just having a little trouble with how Myles Connolly has set up the problem, okay? I can't quite agree with Dan England that his life is, not where he doesn't, it's not where he wants it to be, but my view would be it's in pretty good shape, okay? So I'm not going to tell you what happens when he gets this opportunity, but the whole novel is moving toward that. So is this novel like Mr. Blue? It is, but Dan England is not a kind of a St. Francis character. But what he does have is a tremendous sense, and a lot of these Catholic novels have this, a sense of the history of the church, a sense of the church incarnate in time. I was thinking, talking to somebody about this book, of an experience a friend of mine had when he was first ordained. So he would be about 26 years of age, okay? And he went on a sick call. And he rang the bell of the apartment, and the woman opened the door, and he said, "Oh, I'm Father so-and-so from the parish. I'm coming to visit your husband." And she yelled out, "Joe, there's a priest here, but he looks like a young boy." And the man in the bedroom yelled back, "He's not a young boy. He's 2,000 years old," okay? And that sense of the church in time, that we're all, you and I are members of a church, those of us who are Christian and Catholic, in which there are many, many saints, many, many martyrs, many, many heroes, okay? And I get that often from some of these Catholic writers. Their conscience is very broad, and their conscience is very deep. And often their vision of what it means to be a Catholic is very deep. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't even be doing this series, okay? So I think that, well, a Catholic novel is not a catechism. It can inspire us quite a bit. Myles Connolly had, I think, over 40 citations as a producer and a writer in Hollywood. And reading Mr. Blue and reading this novel, he seems to me to be the kind of man I would have loved to have met. And he also is the kind of man I wish he had written more novels, and I wish he had written more screenplays. He was involved at least once or twice with Frank Capra, and Mr. Blue and this novel kind of convey the kind of Catholicism that Capra put into movies like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Meet John Doe, It's a Wonderful Life. How can I describe it? First of all, it's very, very joyful. And in each situation, the main character is obviously a Christ figure who goes through some suffering, and then there's a kind of a resurrection experience. There's something like that also in Dan England and the Noonday Devil, okay? And of course, there's something like that in Mr. Blue. When we did Mr. Blue in this series of talks, I mentioned to you that there's one scene that everybody remembers. The scene is when, in a concentration camp apparently run by the communists, a priest is saying Mass. It's a screenplay. Mr. Blue has written a screenplay. And at the moment of consecration, it's the end of the world. It's the second coming of Christ. Now, there is no dramatic scene like that in Dan England, okay? It's more, how can I put it? It's more the day-to-day living of Dan England as a joyous Christian. And that joy is kind of infectious. It touches other people. And that's why I was a little, I couldn't quite go along with what the author seemed to be saying. He seemed to be saying that somehow there was something lacking in Dan England's life, that he hadn't done this great heroic thing. I can't sympathize with that because I think living as a Christian is pretty heroic, okay? So these are minor criticisms. I would encourage you to read this. I would wholeheartedly recommend this book. And I plan, I know Connolly has written a couple of other novels. I've only read Mr. Blue and this one. But I love them both so much, I certainly am going to investigate, looking for some others. Can I give you the theme of this book? I would say the way Connolly understands Noonday Devil, the theme of the book is we are called to something heroic. And I think there is something in us that we want to make a difference. In the recent years, and it's partly because of reading Catholic novels, I have very much embraced the notion that everybody wants to be part of a story that is bigger than himself or herself. Everybody wants to feel they fit into something that is transcendent. Everybody, I think, feels this way. And of course, there is no story equal to Christ's story, okay? I wonder if some of the disillusion among artists today, theater, film, apparently some of the bestseller writers, okay, television maybe, they have not been able to find a story which elevates their experience, which illuminates their experience and gives them a sense of their dignity. To be a human person is to be something sacred. And to be a human person is to be someone who has a capacity for the infinite. And we all want that. My only minor objection or criticism of the book would be Dan England's got it. Whether he does something that everybody thinks is heroic or not, he is a really devout Christian, and he really is influencing and affecting people. So my definition of Acedia that I started to show off with, it doesn't seem to be the definition of Myles Connolly in this book, because there's no sense in the book that Dan England has run out of gas or that he's not interested in the spiritual life. So Myles Connolly's understanding is a little bit different. I think he wants to say the Noonday Devil is whatever it is that's preventing Dan England from writing this great book. So someone said to me, maybe there are many Noonday Devils and they're just distraction. That's okay, but that's not the traditional understanding of it. The traditional understanding of it is what spiritual writers have called acedia, lack of interest, lack of excitement, a kind of a laziness, okay? The quote-unquote spiritual life is kind of put on the shelf. It's not what excites me anymore. It's not what makes me enthusiastic anymore, and that's not Dan England, okay? So I strongly, I think you'll find it a very uplifting book and a really well-written novel. So I strongly recommend you to take a look at it.